So today I'm going to show you how to render a dynamic tile map in Unity. So we can see here in Unity I've got this green square which shows where my tile map is. I'm just going to show the effect first of all. So this is where the tile map actually is. And then if I just run the game, maybe if I hide the trees in fact as well, because that'll just show you a little bit better. You can see essentially I've got, like, rather than having just the same grass everywhere, I've got like these different little flowers and stones and bits of grass and things. So that's all done programmatically, so this is different every time and I don't have to do it all by hand. So if you would like to do this as well, then carry on watching. So the first thing, if you don't know how to create a static tile map and kind of paint into a tile map, I suggest you watch some tutorials about how to do that first. But very briefly, like, what you would do is you would go game object, then you would go to 2D object, tile map, rectangular. That would add a grid, and the child of that grid would be the tile map itself. You would then go to Window and 2D and Tile Palette to open up the Tile Palette. And this would be empty for you initially. What you would then do is drag into the Tile Palette a sprite sheet, like this one that I've got here, which is essentially a 16 by 16 grid of different tiles that's been sliced already in the sprite editor. It's important to make sure that your pixels per unit in the inspector does also match the dimensions of these tiles. Otherwise, if the pixels per unit is wrong, like if that's left at 100, then you'll see that very small tiles in the middle of a big empty square. So you don't really want that. So once you drag your sprite sheet into the tile palette, it will appear in the tile palette, and it will also ask you for a folder to generate tiles into. And I've already done that, so what you'll find is in your tiles folder you'll also get all of these individual tile assets generated when you drag your sprite sheet of tiles into the tile palette. It generates these individual tile assets, and these are what we're going to be working with to dynamically populate the tile map. So let's just look at the tile map, the dynamic tile map again. It's got that selected there. So you can see the pivot there in the center, and we've got the tile map. We've got this tile generator script which is attached, and you can see I've got a bunch of inputs, one of which is the tile map itself. I've got an x and y integer for the limits that we want to render to, and then I've got a bunch of different tile assets here. Now I did think about sort of loading this programmatically from a folder, like using resources load or something like this. In the end, I found it was actually easier, because I'm working in the editor a lot anyway. I found it was easier to just drag the ones I specifically wanted into these specific slots rather than to just take everything out of a folder, because there were lots of things I didn't want as well, and this seemed to make the most sense for me at this point in the development. In the future I might have like separate JSON files with lists of tile assets for different areas, things like that, but at the moment this worked well enough for me. The main thing I wanted to sort of get across was how the scripting works in terms of adding tile assets, because I didn't find a really clear tutorial on that. So let's jump across to the script, and first of all we've got up at the top here, using Unity Engine tile maps. So you need those two includes in order to work with tile maps. Then got this serialized field private. If you've not seen that before, it's roughly doing the same thing as public does. It's just that by doing it in this way, you actually keep the scope of the variable more private, but it still does create a slot for it in the editor because of this serialized field. So this essentially just allows me to do the same thing I could do with a public variable, having it appear in the editor without it actually being public. So we've got the tile map itself, we've got the limits x and y, and like I said, we've got a bunch of different tile assets coming in. And the name for one of these individual tiles is called a tile base. So these individual tiles are known as tile base. So when the script starts, it calls fill map, and the fill map, it calls it with a limit x and y that we've provided from the editor. Then the fill map function itself is just iterating from minus x to plus x and from minus y to plus y. And for every coordinate pair, it's calling render random tile, which is a function up here. So the reason why I did it from minus x to plus x is just because I wanted everything sort of centered around the origin. If you wanted it from 0 to 100 or something, you could equally do that as well. So when I come into the render random tile function, the first thing I do is set the x and y on this location, which is a integer vector. So essentially I'm taking that x and y that's coming in and setting a temporary vector to have the same values. Then I generate a random number, random integer, p, and that's from 0 to 100 inclusive, because when we call this random range, that second parameter is actually exclusive, so this means I'll never get a 101. I will get something between 0 and 100. This is pretty confusing, and I know like lots of people get caught out by it, so it's worth mentioning it again if you have not been caught out by it before. If you have, then you'll remember, but if you've not, then it could save you some pain. Then we come into this switch statement, and essentially I'm just, based on this probability, like this random number between 0 and 100, I do a case statement, and depending on the number that comes up, I render a different tile. And so this line here, this one line, map.setTile, that is the function you call. This is a function that is a member of the tile map. So we call this setTile function on the tile map itself. We give it the location, which is just a vector, and then we give it the tile that we want to render. It's really as simple as that. Just map.setTile and the location vector and the actual asset, which is the tile base asset from that folder that we looked at before. Now, what you can do as well, like what I've done here, is I've got a second function which I've called render detail tile, which is just doing the same thing again, but it's like if we're already rendering a pink flower, then this will pick one of 3 assets which are all similar pink flowers. So it kind of adds more variety to the variety in a sense. And again, so this time we're doing random range 1 to 4, which effectively is going to give us 1, 2, or 3. And that's really all there is to it. The only other thing to say, if you didn't know, like for a while now in C# you can do greater than, like you can do comparisons in your case statements. You didn't used to be able to, but for a while you have been able to. So that if you've been doing things like this with if and else, it's a lot nicer if you just use the case statement with a comparison inside. And that is really all you need to know to work with tile maps programmatically, is that you bring the tile map in as tile map asset, you bring your individual tiles in as tile base assets, and they come from when you drag your sprite sheet into your tile palette, then it will generate these individual tile base assets and ask you where to save them. So you need to be mindful of that when you're doing that, that you do actually know where it saved them, so that it's easy for you when you come to do this later on. But really, that is all you need. You need the tile map, the tile base, and then you just literally call map set tile with a vector that is the location you want to set, and the tile base asset that is the individual tile you want to render there. And then if we go back one more time to Unity, let's just recap. So these are all the tiles again. This is the map. And then when we run, the effect is, let me just hide the trees once more. The effect is that we can just render quite a variety of tiles throughout an area without kind of getting any really boring, repetitive stuff, and without having to do it by hand. So I hope this is helpful to you. If you have any questions or there's anything that I did not make clear, please just let me know, and I will do my best to answer those questions. Otherwise, I hope this is useful to you, and I will catch you in the next one.